Red emergency lights strobed across the hospital cruiser's corridors as Dr. Miriam Albright rushed between beds, her white coat flapping behind her like a battle flag. "Get those burn victims to Bay 3, she shouted over the blaring alarms. "And someone shut off that damn noise. Our patients are scared enough." "Doctor." Nurse Rodriguez grabbed her arm, face pale with fear. 3 more Drachnid warships just dropped out of hyperspace. They're not responding to our ceasefire signals. We've tried all frequencies, even old-style radio. Through the viewport, massive shadow-black ships loomed against the stars, their hulls bristling with weapons. Their weapon ports glowed an angry red, despite the clear medical crosses painted across the cruiser's hull and the emergency beacons broadcasting their civilian status. "This is a civilian hospital vessel." Dr. Albright's voice crackled through the secure channel at Navy HQ. Admiral Fain and Colonel Reyes listened, their faces grim as stone. "We have over 2,000 refugees aboard, including 800 children. Please respond. We pose no threat." The alien observer, Ixalan, furiously scribbled notes with their 4-fingered hand, antenna twitching in distress. Their normally blue skin had paled to a sickly gray as they witnessed the unfolding atrocity. "They're targeting our engines," someone screamed in the background. "But we have children in the aft sections. Please, we're unarmed. We're doctors." A violent explosion rocked the feed. Sparks showered from overhead panels as medical equipment crashed to the floor. Patients screamed, and someone started crying, a child's voice cutting through the chaos. "May God forgive them." Dr. Albright's voice wavered, steady, despite everything. "Because we—" The transmission dissolved into static. Admiral Fain's fists clenched until her knuckles went white, rage burning in her dark eyes. She turned to face Colonel Reyes and the shaken alien observer, her voice as cold as space itself. "They've made their choice," she said coldly. "Now we make ours." The static-filled silence of the hospital ship's final moments echoed in Admiral Fain's mind as she strode through the UHF War Council chamber. The weight of those last desperate words, of innocent lives snuffed out, settled over the room, pressing down like the void of space itself. There would be no hesitation. The decision had already been made. Admiral Fain strode into the UHF War Council chamber, her boots echoing against the marble floor. The room buzzed with urgent whispers from the gathered officials seated around the curved table. Datapads and coffee cups littered the polished surface. Colonel Reyes fell into step beside her, his scarred face set in stone, jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. A blue hologram flickered to life, showing Dr. Albright's tired face. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed sleepless nights in the lab. "The lab results are conclusive," she said, her voice heavy. "Our hospital ship carried only standard medical supplies, no weapons, no dangerous materials, just medicine and refugees. We found children's toys in the wreckage." Lieutenant Commander Delgado stood up, her bright streaked hair standing out against her crisp uniform. Her hands were balled into fists at her sides. "Third wing is ready to launch, Admiral. All fighters fueled and armed. We can be in Drachnid space within hours. My pilots are chomping at the bit. The engineering corps can convert 30 cargo ships into troop carriers in 5 days," added Jin Shu from his seat, tapping rapidly on his datapad. "We've already started pulling crews together, working triple shifts to get it done." High Observer Ixalan raised their 4-fingered hand, membrane-thin skin glowing with anxiety. The collective Galactic Assembly would be willing to arrange peace talks. Perhaps this tragic misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? Colonel Reyes's voice cut like a knife. He slammed his fist on the table, making cups jump. "They fired on clearly marked medical vessels. On children. There's nothing to misunderstand about that." Admiral Fain placed both hands on the table, leaning forward. The room fell silent under her steady gaze. "The time for talks ended when they murdered 2,000 helpless refugees. I move for immediate military action. We've tried being nice, look where that got us." The council chamber erupted in voices. Some called for measured responses, others demanded swift revenge. But as the evidence mounted, the ignored distress calls, the deliberate targeting of medical bays, the recovered black box recordings of screaming civilians. The mood shifted. All in favor of authorizing full military response? The council president's voice rang out above the chaos. Hands rose across the chamber. Even those who had argued for patience now voted yes. The decision was unanimous. Not a single hand remained lowered. Admiral Fane, the president said, you will take command of the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet. Your orders are simple. If the Drachnid Empire refuses to surrender and face justice for their war crimes, you will bring them to their knees. Show them why humanity's mercy shouldn't be mistaken for weakness. Fane straightened, her dark eyes fierce. A dangerous smile played at the corners of her mouth. We mobilize within the week. No more mercy for those who slaughter the innocent. The Drachnids wanted humanity's attention. Well, now they have it. The War Council's ruling sent ripples through the fleet, transforming grief into purpose. Orders were issued, fleets mobilized, and the steady hum of industry filled the orbital shipyards as humanity prepared to deliver its answer. On the deck of a converted cargo hauler, Colonel Reyes watched the controlled chaos unfold, knowing the battle ahead would define them all. The massive orbital shipyard hummed with activity, a hive of preparation against the backdrop of stars. Colonel Reyes walked down the loading ramp of a converted cargo hauler, his boots clanking on the metal. All around him, soldiers hustled equipment into ships that until last week had carried grain and mining supplies. The scar on his cheek pulled tight as he frowned at the organized mayhem. "How are those mass drivers holding up, Jin?" he called out to Warrant Officer Shu, who was elbow-deep in an access panel, surrounded by scattered tools and diagnostic readouts. Jin wiped grease from her hands with a rag that had seen better days. "They're solid, sir. These old haulers are tough, perfect for the new weapons. Not pretty, but they'll pack one hell of a punch. Already tested 3 of them in the sim chamber." Nearby, Lieutenant Commander Delgado's voice crackled over the comm as she put her fighter through its paces. "Coming in hot." Her sleek craft screamed past the viewport, rolling through maneuvers that made several techs wince and duck, despite being safely behind the reinforced glass. "Sparrow, those safeties are there for a reason," Jin muttered, shaking her head as she picked up a fallen wrench. "You're gonna tear the wings off one of these days." "Can't play it safe anymore," Delgado responded, her fighter banking hard enough to leave a vapor trail. "Not after what they did. Besides, if I break it, you'll just fix it better than new." Colonel Reyes moved among the troops, catching snippets of conversation. 2 young soldiers were checking their gear, voices tight with emotion. Their hands moved through familiar motions while their minds were clearly elsewhere. "Did you see the hospital footage?" one asked, checking his rifle's sight for the 3rd time in as many minutes. "Yeah. My cousin was a nurse on a similar ship. Could have been her." The second soldier slammed a magazine home harder than necessary, making nearby troops jump. High Observer Ixalan drifted through the organized chaos, datapad in hand. The aliens' movements were careful, measured, as though walking through a powder keg. Which, Reyes reflected, wasn't far from the truth. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Your troops seem highly motivated, Colonel," Ixalan noted quietly, antennae twitching at each burst of activity. "That's one way to put it," Reyes replied, watching another cargo ship have its hull reinforced with plates that would have been overkill on a battleship. Anger can be useful, if properly channeled. The last of the ammunition crates floated up the gravity lift into the converted hauler's hold, guided by troops who triple-checked every seal and lock. Colonel Reyes made his way to the main viewport, taking in the vast star field before them. The stars seemed colder somehow, more distant. "We're as ready as we'll ever be," he muttered, his reflection grim in the transparent steel. The final cargo ships were armed, the last fighters prepped. The time for assembly was over. Now came the time for war. Admiral Fane stood on the Steadfast's bridge, gazing at the asteroid field ahead. The first move was theirs to make, and the Drachnids were about to realize the consequences of their mistake. The asteroid field stretched endlessly before them, a sea of tumbling rocks backlit by distant stars. Admiral Fane stood on the bridge of her flagship, the UHF Steadfast, her dark eyes scanning the tactical display. The massive viewscreen cast a soft blue glow across her face as she studied the field's ever-shifting patterns. "Contact," whispered the sensor officer, leaning forward in his chair. 3 Drachnid vessels, moving in standard patrol formation. They're running active scans of the sector. Fane's lips curved slightly. The Drachnids were so predictable sometimes. "Perfect. Lieutenant Commander Delgado, are your fighters ready?" "Ready and eager, Admiral." Delgado's voice crackled through the comm, carrying her trademark confidence. Her squadron of fighters hung back, hidden behind a cluster of larger asteroids, engines idling at minimal power to avoid detection. "Warrant Officer Shu, status on those charges?" Jin's steady voice replied, "All mining charges are in position and primed, Admiral. Just say the word. Each one's got enough punch to crack these rocks wide open." Fane nodded, her plan crystallizing. "Begin Operation Wounded Bird. Delgado, make it look good." 3 human scout ships drifted into view, seemingly damaged and limping. Their hulls sparked occasionally, venting harmless but visible plasma trails. As expected, the Drachnid patrol took notice immediately. "They're taking the bait," Delgado reported, excitement creeping into her voice. "Moving to intercept our scouts. Look at them, like sharks smelling blood in the water." The Drachnid ships accelerated, their sleek forms cutting through the asteroid field with predatory grace. As they closed in on the apparently helpless scout ships, Delgado's squadron burst from cover, weapons blazing, but only briefly. "Oh no. We're outgunned." Delgado's voice carried fake panic through the comm, hamming it up perfectly. Her fighters scattered in apparent terror, weaving between asteroids like startled birds. The Drachnid vessels gave chase, exactly as planned. They pushed deeper into the field, following Delgado's retreating squadron, their superior firepower lighting up space around them. "Almost there," Jin muttered, watching the enemy ship's positions carefully on his display. "Just a little further. Right into the sweet spot." Admiral Fane raised her hand, waiting for the perfect moment. "Now." Jin's fingers flew across his console. The strategically placed mining charges detonated in sequence, shattering asteroids into deadly shrapnel. The Drachnid formation broke apart as their ships tried to dodge the unexpected debris field, their tight formation dissolving into chaos. "Delgado, hit them," Fane ordered, her voice sharp with authority. Delgado's squadron wheeled around, no longer playing helpless prey. They struck from multiple angles, their weapons finding weak points in the Drachnid ship's scattered defenses. The fighters moved like a well-rehearsed dance team, each pilot knowing their role perfectly. 2 Drachnid vessels erupted in flames, their hulls splitting apart in the cold vacuum, but the third managed to slip away, its engines flaring bright blue as it jumped to faster-than-light speed. "Should we pursue?" Delgado asked, her fighters already forming up on her wing. "No," Admiral Fane replied, her voice hard with satisfaction. "Let them run. Let them tell their commanders what happened here." She straightened her uniform and issued her next command. "Press forward. Let them know we're coming. And Delgado? Nice acting out there." The ambush was swift, the enemy's response predictable. Wounded, scattered, and exposed, the Drachnid patrol fleet fled into the void, one ship barely escaping with its life. It was only a matter of time before their wounded soldier fell into human hands, bringing with him secrets that could alter the course of the war. Colonel Reyes watched through the holding cell's window as medical staff treated the Drachnid survivors' wounds. The alien's scaled skin was an ashen gray, almost sickly looking, and his large eyes darted nervously around the room like a cornered animal. His breathing came in short, ragged bursts that fogged the oxygen mask they'd fitted him with. "He surrendered without a fight," Dr. Albright said, standing beside Reyes. "That's unusual for their kind. He practically ran toward our lines with his hands up." "Could be a trick," Reyes growled. his hand resting on his sidearm. The scar on his cheek seemed darker in the harsh light, twitching slightly as his jaw clenched. Wouldn't be the first time they've used our mercy against us. The Drachnid, Specialist Tarek, according to his rank insignia, looked directly at them and spoke in halting English, his voice muffled by the mask. "Please, I must tell you something important. Something you need to hear." Dr. Albright stepped forward, but Reyes caught her arm. His grip was firm, but not rough. "Let me go first." He entered the cell, keeping a safe distance. His boots scraped against the metal floor as he positioned himself between the alien and the door. "Talk." "Our leaders. They told us the hospital ship carried weapons, deadly diseases to use against our people." Tarek's voice shook, his clawed hands fidgeting with the edge of his medical blanket. "Many of us didn't believe it, but speaking out meant death. They made examples of doubters." "Convenient excuse," Reyes said coldly, his fingers drumming against his holster. Dr. Albright pushed past him, her white coat swishing. "Those were my colleagues on that ship. We treated everyone, human, alien, even injured drachnids when we found them. We never carried weapons. I trained half those doctors myself." High Observer Ixilon entered quietly, datapad in hand. The tall, silvery alien's antenna twitched with interest, catching the light from the medical monitors. "I know that now," Tarek said, hanging his head. His scales rattled slightly as he trembled. "Many drachnids oppose this war. We're not all monsters. Please. Your fleet is powerful. But when you strike back, remember there are innocent civilians, children, elders. They're trapped just like we were." "Like the ones on our hospital ship?" Reyes stepped closer, his voice dangerous, barely above a whisper. "Colonel." Dr. Albright's tone was sharp as a scalpel. "He came to us willingly. That took courage, more than most would show." Ixilon spoke up, tapping notes into the datapad. "This is unprecedented. In all recorded conflicts, no drachnid has ever surrendered or spoken against their leadership. Their social conditioning is legendary." Tarek looked at them pleadingly, his tail curling tight against his body, a sign of submission in his species. "I can help you. I know their codes, their transmission patterns. Just, please show mercy to those who aren't fighting. We can save lives on both sides." Reyes paced the small cell, his combat boots clicking on the metal floor. The colonel's face was a mask of conflicting emotions, rage at the hospital ship's destruction warring with his own code of honor. His hands clenched and unclenched as he walked. Finally, he stopped. "Dr. Albright, your medical opinion?" "He's telling the truth. My bioscanners show no deception patterns. Heart rate, brain activity, it all matches honest testimony." "Ixilon." The alien observer nodded, antenna bobbing. This could be vital testimony for the Galactic Assembly, the first crack in their wall of silence. Reyes turned to Tarek. "I'll assign you as a cultural liaison, but step one toe out of line." He left the threat unspoken, but his hand on his weapon made the message clear. "I understand," Tarek said quietly, slumping back against his pillows. "Thank you. I won't let you down." As they left the cell, Reyes noticed the distrustful glares from his soldiers in the corridor. Some hands tightened on weapons, others muttered under their breath. This wouldn't be easy, but if Tarek was telling the truth, it might help them end this war with less bloodshed. And after all they'd seen, less bloodshed was worth the risk. Tarek's quiet plea for mercy lingered in the air long after the cell door shut behind him. His words were a whisper against the tide of war, a single thread of doubt woven into a tapestry of vengeance. But to Admiral Fane and her officers, his knowledge was a weapon, one they would wield with precision. At the forward staging point, Admiral Fane stood before a massive holographic display of Drachnid space. The blue glow highlighted the determination etched on her face as she traced potential attack vectors with her finger. Her dark eyes narrowed as she studied the complex web of defense stations and patrol routes. Their orbital defense grid has gaps here and here, Tarek explained, his scaled hand pointing to specific sectors. The Empire focused their resources on protecting trade routes, leaving these military installations surprisingly exposed. They never imagined anyone would dare strike at their core worlds. Perfect for our hit-and-fade tactics, Lieutenant Commander Delgado chimed in, her eyes lighting up with that familiar pre-battle spark. My pilots can slip through those blind spots. We'll be in and out before they know what hit them. Dr. Albright stepped onto the briefing room's central platform, her white coat a stark contrast against the dim lighting. The gathered officers fell silent as she began to speak. I've treated soldiers from 100 worlds, she said, her voice carrying to every corner. What sets us apart isn't our weapons or our anger. It's our commitment to justice. Remember the medical staff who died helping others. Honor them by showing mercy when you can. We're better than mindless revenge. Colonel Reyes nodded slowly, absently touching the scar on his cheek. We're not here for revenge. We're here to stop them from hurting anyone else. Every strike has to mean something. In the corner, High Observer Ixalan's communication device buzzed constantly, its lights flashing urgently. The Galactic Assembly is unsettled, they reported, mandibles clicking nervously. Your response has sparked intense debate, but many species are watching with great interest. They see humans fighting not just with strength, but with principle. Jin Shu arrived with final readiness reports, grease still fresh on her hands from last-minute adjustments. The fleet's modified and ready, Admiral. Every ship's gotten my personal attention. Those Drachnid sensors won't know what to make of us. Admiral Fane absorbed all their input, then straightened her uniform with practiced efficiency. Here's how we proceed, she announced, expanding the hologram until it filled the room. We'll target these key installations first, disrupting their command and control. Then we punch straight through to their capital world, show them the cost of attacking the defenseless. They wanted to see humanity's response? They're about to get a front-row seat. The room hummed with purpose as officers began coordinating their assigned roles. Tarek provided authentication codes and patrol schedules, his voice steady despite knowing he was helping bring down his own empire. His loyalty to justice outweighed any remaining ties to his former masters. Admiral Fane's voice cut through the activity. No turning back now. We secure victory, and we show the galaxy who we really are. Today we prove that humanity stands for something greater than conquest. With every report that arrived, the truth became clearer. The Drachnid defenses were not invincible. Their arrogance had left them vulnerable. As the fleet surged forward, Reyes and his troops braced for impact, knowing that once they made landfall there would be no turning back. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace above the Drachnid industrial colony, their ships casting long, ominous shadows across its smog-filled atmosphere. Colonel Reyes stood tall in the dropship bay, meticulously checking his armor seals one final time. The air was thick with tension and the low hum of the ship's engines. All units, remember, we hit hard and fast, but watch your fire near civilian zones. He broadcast to his troops, his voice steady and commanding. The soldiers around him nodded grimly, their faces set with determination rather than bloodlust. They knew the stakes and were ready to execute their mission with precision. Above, Lieutenant Commander Delgado led her fighter squadrons in a devastating dance through the orbital defenses. Her voice crackled over the comm. These guns are ancient. They can't track our new targeting systems, moving to clear the next sector. Her pilots followed her lead, their ships weaving through the sky like a well-choreographed ballet of destruction. Drop pods rained from the sky like metallic meteors, tearing through the atmosphere with a fiery trail. Inside one, Reyes felt the familiar gut punch of atmospheric entry. His pod slammed into the ground outside a massive factory complex, the door blasting outward with a thunderous boom. He emerged with his rifle ready, but found only terrified Drachnid workers fleeing in panic. Their eyes wide with fear, they scattered like leaves in a storm. "They're running scared, sir," reported one of his sergeants, breathless from the drop. Word of the hospital ship got around. Most of their militia just dropped their weapons and ran. The sergeant's face was a mix of relief and caution, knowing that fear could make the enemy unpredictable. Dr. Albright's medical teams followed close behind the advance, setting up aid stations with practiced efficiency. A young Drachnid mother clutched her child, trembling as human medics approached. But instead of violence, they offered water and emergency rations, their movements slow and reassuring. "We're not here to hurt civilians," Albright assured them through a translator, her voice firm, yet gentle. "You'll be safe with us." The mother's scaled features registered shock, then cautious relief. She accepted the rations with a tentative nod, her child peeking out from behind her with curious eyes. From orbit, Ixalan watched the precise operation unfold through monitoring drones. "Remarkable restraint," he muttered, taking careful notes. "They could level these cities, but they're actively protecting non-combatants." His eyes narrowed as he observed the human troops, a mix of respect and bewilderment playing across his features. Tarek guided infiltration teams through maintenance tunnels he'd helped design years ago. "The main defense command center is through here," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the distant hum of machinery. "They'll have skeleton crews. Most veterans were recalled to the capital weeks ago." His knowledge of the tunnels proved invaluable, allowing the teams to move swiftly and silently. Within hours, the colony's remaining military leadership gathered in the central plaza, laying down their weapons in a somber display of surrender. Colonel Reyes accepted their surrender with a stern nod, his eyes scanning the gathered officers with a mix of relief and resolve. "Send word to command," he ordered, his voice carrying across the plaza. "Colony secured. Minimal civilian casualties. Ready for next phase." His words echoed through the air, a testament to the human fleet's efficiency and restraint. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. The industrial colony had fallen with shocking ease, its defenders lacking the will to fight. But the war was far from won. A hidden stronghold, buried deep within a barren moon, still held the Drachnid command network. And that, Reyes knew, would be where the real fight began. The moon's barren surface stretched out before them as Tarek led the small team toward a hidden entrance. Craters and jagged rocks cast long shadows in the dim starlight. Colonel Reyes kept his weapon ready, scanning for threats while Jin Shu calibrated her equipment, her fingers moving with practiced speed across the control panel. "The guard rotations follow strict patterns," Tarek whispered, his scaled fingers tracing lines on a rough map. His tail twitched nervously as he pointed out key locations. "We have exactly 8 minutes between shifts. Any longer and they'll sound the alarm." Reyes nodded grimly. "Jin, those jammers ready?" "Ready as they'll ever be," she replied, double-checking the makeshift devices cobbled together from spare parts. "Though I still say this is crazy, like jumping into a volcano crazy." Above them, Lieutenant Commander Delgado's voice crackled through their comms. "2 patrol ships just passed. You're clear for the next 20 minutes. Try not to die down there. Paperwork's a pain." They moved like shadows across the rocky ground, keeping low and using the natural cover. Tarek's knowledge proved invaluable. He guided them through maintenance tunnels that bypassed the main security checkpoints, avoiding the heavily armed guards. The fortress's winding corridors felt oppressive, designed for Drachnid bodies rather than humans. The ceiling loomed uncomfortably high, and strange markings covered the walls. Jin worked quickly at each junction, placing small devices that would disrupt the internal communications network. Her hands never shook, despite the pressure. "These should buy us some time when things go wrong," she muttered, connecting the last wire. "When, not if," Reyes said with a tight smile. "It's never if on these missions." Their luck ran out 3 levels down. A squad of Drachnid soldiers rounded the corner, weapons raised. Their armor gleamed dully in the emergency lighting. Reyes saw the shock in their eyes turn to fury as they spotted Tarek. "Traitor!" one of them snarled in their clicking language, mandibles flaring with rage. The firefight was brutal and close, the corridor filled with plasma bolts and the smell of burned metal. Reyes had no choice. These warriors wouldn't back down. Each shot found its mark, and each fallen drachnid made Tarek flinch. The bodies slumped against the walls, their armor scorched black. "They were my squadron mates," Tarek said softly, looking at the bodies. His voice cracked with emotion. "We trained together, shared meals, told jokes." "I'm sorry." Reyes meant it. He'd seen that same pain in civil wars back home. The way friends ended up on opposite sides, forced to fight each other. They pushed deeper into the fortress. Jin's devices worked perfectly, throwing the internal systems into chaos. Screens flickered and died, doors opened and closed at random. But the defenders fought with increasing desperation, some charging with bare claws when their weapons failed. Their screams echoed through the corridors. "They think they're protecting their homes," Tarek explained as they took cover behind a fallen column. Plasma fire scorched the wall above their heads. "The propaganda tells them humans will destroy everything, that you're monsters who kill without mercy." Reyes felt the weight of each kill. These weren't evil monsters, just soldiers following orders, believing they fought for what was right. But he couldn't hesitate. The memory of the hospital ship drove him forward. All those innocent lives lost in an instant of senseless violence. When they finally reached the central command node, Jin got to work planting the charges while Reyes and Tarek held off waves of defenders. The explosion rocked the entire structure, and warning klaxons filled the air with their deep alien wail. "Mission accomplished," Reyes reported to Delgado as they fought their way back out, stepping over debris and bodies. "But we paid for it. Heavy resistance, multiple casualties." Tarek said nothing, his eyes fixed straight ahead as they extracted. The fortress behind them was in chaos, its defenses blind and scattered. They had won, but victory tasted bitter. Another battle finished, another piece of his old life destroyed. War spared no one's conscience. The fortress was in ruins, its defenses shattered. But the cost had been steep, and the war was far from over. As Reyes and his battered squad withdrew, alarms blared across human channels. Drachnid reinforcements had arrived. And this time they came in force. The emergency klaxons blared through the fleet as Admiral Fane's eyes narrowed at the tactical display. Red dots swarmed across the screen, Drachnid warships, dozens of them, emerging from hyperspace like angry wasps from a disturbed nest. "All ships, battle stations," she ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding before her. "Delgado, get your fighters in the air, and watch your six out there." "Already on it, Admiral," Delgado replied through the comm, a hint of excitement in her voice. She was strapping into her cockpit, her hands flying over the controls with practiced ease. "Sparrow Squadron, form up on me. We've got company." And they didn't even bring snacks. Through the observation deck, Ixalan watched in horror as the massive Drachnid dreadnought emerged from the darkness of space. Its hull bristled with weapons, looking like a floating fortress of spikes and turrets. The ship alone was bigger than some small moons. "I am Supreme Nestmaster Krill," a guttural voice boomed across all frequencies, dripping with contempt. "Your species will learn the price of defiance. The galaxy belongs to the strong." The Drachnid war cry that followed sent chills down Ixalan's spine, a shrieking, multi-toned sound that seemed to pierce the very hull of the ship. It reminded him of metal being torn apart. "Break standard formation," Admiral Fane commanded, a slight smile playing at her lips. "Execute Pattern Sierra 7. Let's show them how humans dance." The human fleet moved with surprising grace, ships sliding into positions that made no sense by conventional military doctrine. The Drachnids pressed their attack, clearly expecting the humans to follow traditional CGA combat protocols. Their rigid formation spoke of centuries of unchanged tactics. "Now, Delgado," Fane ordered. Delgado's fighters darted between the larger ships like angry hornets, drawing Drachnid pursuers into carefully prepared kill zones. Hidden charges detonated in clouds of debris, shredding the enemy fighters. Her squadron moved as one, each pilot knowing their role perfectly. "They're not backing off," Delgado reported, her fighter rolling to avoid plasma fire. These guys really want to fight. Should we give them one, Admiral? Krill's dreadnought pushed forward, its weapons lighting up space with deadly energy bolts. 3 human corvettes disappeared in balls of fire, their crews lost in seconds. The loss hit Fane hard, but she kept her face neutral. But Admiral Fane's unorthodox formation was paying off. The Drachnid ships found themselves caught in crossfire they hadn't anticipated, their traditional attack patterns disrupted by the humans' refusal to follow standard space combat doctrine. Ships that had ruled space for centuries were being outmaneuvered by the newcomers. "Status report," Fane demanded as another explosion rocked her flagship, making the deck plates shudder beneath her feet. "We've lost 5 ships," her tactical officer reported, voice tight with emotion. "But the Drachnids have lost 12. They're starting to pull back. Looks like they don't like our party games." Ixalan watched in amazement as the mighty Drachnid fleet began to retreat, their formations broken. Krill's voice came over the comm one final time. "This is not over, humans. You have merely delayed the inevitable. We will return." The cost had been high. Too high. As damage reports flooded in, Admiral Fane stood at her command station, jaw set with determination. The Drachnid ships vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind a field of debris and the bitter taste of a victory bought with human lives. She silently promised the fallen that their sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. The battle had been won, but the war was still unfolding. As the Drachnid fleet retreated, a single message lingered on every channel: "This is not over." Admiral Fane knew it was a promise, not a threat. The next battle would be decisive and the UHF would be ready. Admiral Fane stood at the bridge's tactical station, her hands clasped behind her back as she studied the standoff before them. The Avarice system's orange sun cast an eerie glow across the battlefield, illuminating both fleets facing each other across the void. "They're dug in tight," Colonel Reyes observed, pointing to the screen. Krill's positioned his dreadnought right at the system's jump point. "Then we'll make them move," Fane said. She opened the fleet-wide channel. "All ships, execute Operation Scissor. Battle groups 2 and 4, break left. 3 and 5, right flank. Main force, hold position." The human fleet split apart like a blooming flower, ships peeling away in perfect formation. On the tactical display, Krill's forces began to shift uneasily. "Warrant Officer Shu," Fane called out. "Are those modifications ready?" Jin's voice crackled over the comm. "Yes, ma'am. Every piece of debris is rigged with electromagnetic charges. Just say the word." "Delgado, you're up," Fane ordered. "Draw them into the kill zone." Delgado's fighter squadron streaked forward, weaving through the debris field. "Copy that." "Hey, ugly," she broadcast on an open channel. "Bet you can't catch us." The Drachnid ships took the bait, their formation stretching thin as they pursued the nimble fighters. That's when Jin activated the charges. Thousands of metal fragments suddenly became lethal projectiles, crackling with electricity. They slammed into the Drachnid ship's shields, which flickered and failed under the assault. "Their shield technology," Tarek gasped from his observer position. It's not designed to handle multiple small impacts. We always relied on deflecting large weapons." Ixalan watched in fascination, recording everything. "Remarkable adaptation," they muttered. With the Drachnid formation broken, Admiral Fane sprung the trap. "All groups, converge. Target that dreadnought." Human ships poured in from all sides, their weapons blazing. Krill's massive vessel tried to turn, but it was too slow. Explosions rippled across its hull. "Brothers, sisters, please," Tarek broadcast in the Drachnid language. "Surrender. This fight is lost." Several Drachnid ships powered down their weapons, signaling submission. But Krill's loyalists fought on, their ships exploding one by one rather than yield. The dreadnought's engines flared as it limped toward the jump point. Krill's voice boomed across all frequencies. "This defeat will be answered in blood. The Empire does not forget." Then the massive ship vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind the wreckage of its fleet, and the surrendered vessels. The dust of battle had barely settled when the first casualty reports arrived, each name another weight on Admiral Fane's conscience. But even amidst the wreckage, there was a flicker of something unexpected: mercy. In makeshift medical bays, human and drachnid alike found themselves facing a new kind of battlefield. The makeshift medical bay hummed with activity. Dr. Albright moved between beds, checking on patients, both human and drachnid. The air smelled of antiseptic and fear. "Easy there," she said softly to a young drachnid soldier with a bandaged arm. "The pain medicine will kick in soon." Across the room, Colonel Reyes watched the scene unfold. His weathered face showed the strain of recent battles, but something else flickered in his eyes as he observed a drachnid child clutching a stuffed toy while waiting beside their injured parent. "They're just people," he muttered. "Regular folks caught up in this mess." Ixalan stood nearby, datapad in hand, recording everything. The observer's antennae twitched with interest as they watched Dr. Albright treat another drachnid prisoner. "Your methods are unexpected," Ixalan said to Reyes. "The CGA believed humans would show no mercy after the hospital ship." In the hangar bay, Jin Shu's voice echoed as she directed repair crews. "Careful with that welding torch. These panels need to hold through the next engagement." Lieutenant Commander Delgado sat on a supply crate helping sort medical supplies. Her flight suit was stained with grease from helping with repairs. "Never thought I'd be patching up the same people who were shooting at me yesterday." A group of drachnid civilians huddled together near the far wall, watching nervously as human medical staff approached with food and blankets. Their mandibles clicked anxiously until they realized no harm was coming. Tarek moved among them, speaking softly in their language, reassuring them. "The humans are not what our leaders claimed. Look around you, they treat our wounded, feed our hungry." Dr. Albright finished bandaging another patient and wiped her brow. "War makes enemies of strangers," she said to no one in particular. "But medicine? Medicine makes us all the same." Colonel Reyes approached a drachnid family, his usual stern expression softening as he knelt to offer the child a ration bar. The young one accepted it hesitantly, mandibles working in their species' version of a smile. Ixalan made another note, antenna quivering. "Remarkable. In all my years observing species across the galaxy, I've never seen such a combination of military might and compassion." In the command center, Admiral Fane reviewed casualty reports. She looked up at the gathered officers and spoke firmly. "We finish this war, and then we rebuild." The war had reached its breaking point, but now another question loomed. What came after? Even as engineers repaired what had been destroyed and medics treated the wounded, Admiral Fane knew the fight was not yet finished. The drachnid homeworld still stood, and with it the man responsible for all of this. Admiral Fane stood at the bridge viewport, watching Krellin Prime grow larger. The drachnid homeworld's orbital defense rings glinted like deadly jewelry in the light of its sun. "All units report ready, Admiral," Colonel Reyes said, his voice tight with focus. "Then it's time." She turned to face the bridge crew. "Launch Operation Thunderstrike." Delgado's voice crackled over the comm. "Sparrow Squadron, form up on me. Those defense stations won't know what hit them." Jinshu's infiltration drones streamed from the launch bays alongside the fighters, their small profiles making them nearly invisible against the backdrop of space. On the surface below, Supreme Nestmaster Krill paced in his fortress command center. "Let them come," he snarled to his officers. "We'll show these humans the price of their arrogance." The first wave struck like lightning. Delgado's fighters wove through laser fire, targeting crucial power nodes on the orbital stations. Jin's drones slipped through shield gaps, attaching themselves to communication arrays. "Station 3 is offline," someone shouted. 4 and 7 losing power." The orbital ring began to crumble. As defense platforms went dark one by one, Colonel Reyes led the ground assault. Drop pods streaked through the atmosphere, met by sheets of anti-aircraft fire. "All units push through. Reyes commanded as his pod slammed into the soil of Krellin Prime. Establish that beachhead. Dr. Albright coordinated from a medical frigate in low orbit. Civilian evacuation corridors are marked. All units hold fire in zones Alpha through Delta. Tarek's voice boomed across the Drachnid emergency frequencies in their native language. People of Krellin Prime, the humans offer you safe passage. Do not throw away your lives for Krill's pride. Inside the fortress, Krill watched streams of civilians fleeing through the designated corridors. His claws dug into the command console. Cowards, he hissed. We will show these humans what it means to face true warriors. The human forces secured their landing zones under heavy fire. Colonel Reyes directed troops toward the looming fortress, while Delgado's fighters kept Drachnid air support at bay. They fought street by street, building by building, until they stood before the massive gates of Krill's stronghold. Admiral Fane's voice cut through the battlefield chatter. The orbital defense grid is neutralized. Ground forces in position. Commence final assault. The final invasion had begun. As human forces spread across Krellin Prime, Admiral Fane watched from orbit, waiting for the moment they could strike at the Empire's heart. Deep below, Reyes and his team prepared to make their move, one that would end this war for good. Colonel Reyes crouched in the dimly lit tunnel, his squad behind him. The air was thick with dust and the metallic tang of weapons fire. Tarek pointed ahead to a junction where the corridor split 3 ways. Left leads to the throne room, Tarek whispered. But there will be traps. Reyes nodded, tapping his comm. Jin, what do your sensors show? Motion triggers everywhere, Colonel. Jin Shu's voice crackled. I can disable some, but others are mechanical. Old school. An explosion rocked the tunnel, showering them with debris. Delgado's voice cut in. Sorry, Colonel. Can't provide much cover down there. These tunnels are too tight for my fighters. Hold topside position, Reyes ordered. We'll handle this the hard way. They advanced carefully, disabling pressure plates and tripwires. A group of Drachnid guards charged from a side passage, mandibles clicking war cries. The fighting was brutal and close, exactly what the honor guard had trained for. Dr. Albright, we have wounded, Reyes called after the skirmish. 3 critical. The nearest extraction point is 20 minutes away, she responded, tension in her voice. I can't guarantee they'll make it that long. Reyes felt the weight of command. Do what you can. We press on. Jin Shu's demolition charges sealed off side tunnels as they went, preventing ambushes. But it also meant no retreat. The air grew thinner as they descended deeper. They reached a vast chamber with ornate pillars. Supreme Nestmaster Krill stood on a raised platform, surrounded by his elite guards. The Drachnid leader's armor gleamed dully in the bioluminescent light. So, Krill's voice boomed, the humans dare enter the sacred heart of our empire. He raised his ceremonial staff, and dozens of guards emerged from hidden alcoves. Reyes and his team took defensive positions behind pillars as energy weapons lit up the chamber. This was the final defense line, and both sides knew it would be fought to the bitter end. The fortress was a labyrinth of traps and defenses, but Reyes and his squad had come too far to turn back now. With every step, they drew closer to the throne room, where Krill waited, one final obstacle between humanity and victory. The corridor opened into a vast circular chamber, its domed ceiling lost in shadows above. Supreme Nestmaster Krill stood at its center, his massive form towering over his elite guards. The Drachnid leader's armor gleamed dully in the low light, his scythe-like limbs clicking against the metal floor. So, Krill's voice rumbled. The humans send their ground pounder to face me. Reyes kept his weapon trained on the Drachnid leader. It ends here, Krill. Nestmaster. Tarek stepped forward. The hospital ship, you were deceived. There were no bioweapons, only injured refugees. Krill's compound eyes flashed. Lies from a traitor. The Drachnid guards surged forward. Reyes rolled left as a scythe limb slashed where his head had been. The chamber erupted in chaos. Gunfire echoed off the walls as Reyes's squad engaged the guards. Krill moved with shocking speed for his size, forcing Reyes to dodge constantly. A glancing blow caught Reyes's shoulder, drawing blood. He grunted, remembering the hospital ship's final moments. That fury drove him forward. "The intelligence was wrong," Tarek shouted above the fighting. "Check the decoded transmissions yourself. Your own scouts confirmed no weapons." Krill hesitated for a split second. Reyes seized the opening, landing a solid hit that cracked the Drachnid's armor. But Krill's counterstrike sent him flying across the chamber. Reyes hit the wall hard, pain flaring in his ribs. He forced himself up, seeing doubt flicker across Krill's features. "Your pride blinds you," Reyes said through gritted teeth. "How many more must die for your mistake?" Krill roared and charged. Reyes waited until the last moment, then dropped and swept Krill's legs. The massive Drachnid crashed down. Before he could recover, Reyes was on him, weapon pressed to Krill's head. "It's over," Reyes said firmly. Krill struggled briefly, then went still. Around them, the remaining guards lowered their weapons. Reyes tapped his comm. "Admiral Fane, this is Colonel Reyes. The fortress is ours. The Empire has fallen." The battle in the throne room had been brutal, but the outcome was undeniable. Krill was defeated, his forces in full retreat. As his empire crumbled, human forces moved through the streets, ensuring that this war ended not with annihilation but with the promise of something better. The silence after Krill's defeat felt heavier than any battle. Through the shattered windows of the Hive Fortress, Admiral Fane watched Drachnid soldiers laying down their weapons in the streets below. Their scythe arms folded in submission, heads bowed. "They're surrendering everywhere," Delgado reported through the comm. "All orbital platforms are powered down." In the city center, Dr. Albright wasted no time. She directed her medical teams to set up treatment stations, her white coat dusty as she moved between injured Drachnids and humans alike. "Everyone gets care," she insisted, kneeling beside a wounded Drachnid civilian. "That's what separates us from monsters." Ixalan walked beside Admiral Fane through the rubble-strewn streets. The alien observers' sensory tendrils wavered at the destruction around them. Collapsed buildings, impact craters, the acrid smell of weapons fire still hanging in the air. "I never imagined," Ixalan began, pausing to watch a human soldier help a limping Drachnid elder. "Your species has such capacity for violence, yet also for mercy." "That's exactly who we are," Fane replied quietly. "We'll fight when we must, but we heal when we can." Nearby, Tarek faced a group of his people. Some pushed forward to grasp his hands in gratitude, while others hung back, hissing, "Traitor!" under their breath. He stood straight-backed, accepting both praise and condemnation. "I chose peace," he told them simply. "I chose a future where our children don't die in pointless wars." Admiral Fane made her way to the central communications hub. The galaxy needed to hear humanity's next move. She activated the broadcast system, her voice carrying across every frequency. "This is Admiral Alyssa Fane of the United Human Federation. The Drachnid Empire has surrendered. To all worlds watching, know this. We will not destroy what we've defeated. Human engineering teams are already en route to restore power and rebuild critical infrastructure. We came to end a threat, not to perpetuate suffering. That is the human way." Dr. Albright looked up from treating patients as the message played. She smiled, knowing that healing could finally begin. Victory had been claimed, but the true test was just beginning. As power was restored and aid flowed through the ruined streets, humans and Drachnids alike faced an unfamiliar reality, one where they were no longer enemies. The morning sun cast long shadows across Krellin Prime's scarred capital. Jin Shu wiped sweat from her brow as she studied the city's damaged power grid layout. Around her, teams of human engineers worked alongside Drachnid laborers, carefully removing fallen debris from the main generator station. "The primary coolant system is shot. she told a Drachnid technician, but we can bypass it using the secondary loop. She pointed to a diagram, keeping her words simple and clear. Across the city, Dr. Albright moved through a makeshift clinic, checking on patients, both human and Drachnid. A young Drachnid child with an injured limb chittered nervously as she approached. "It's okay," she said softly, showing the medical scanner in her hand. "This won't hurt. See?" She demonstrated on herself first, earning a curious tilt of the child's head. In what was once a community gathering space, Tarek faced a group of surviving Drachnid officials. His voice carried both authority and compassion. "They're not here to destroy us," he explained, gesturing to the human aid workers outside. "Look around. They're rebuilding everything they damaged. This is our chance to make things right." Colonel Reyes watched from a nearby rooftop as human and Drachnid children worked together to clear rubble from a playground. One human girl showed a Drachnid youngster how to use a small wheelbarrow, their laughter cutting through the morning air. In his temporary office, Ixalan's fingers flew across his datapad, composing his report to the CGA. The human response defies all previous conflict resolution models. Where we expected retribution, they offer reconstruction. Their engineers repair what their weapons destroyed. Their doctors heal those they fought mere days ago. This is unprecedented. Admiral Fane walked the streets, stopping to help a group struggling with a fallen support beam. A Drachnid elder approached her, mandibles clicking in their language's formal tone. "Your people," the elder said through a translator. "They are not what we were told to fear." Fane smiled, her eyes tired but kind. "We're here to help rebuild. That's what humans do. We fix things, even after they break." In the city center, Jin Shu's team finally restored power to the main grid. Lights flickered on across the capital for the first time since the siege. A cheer went up from both species, echoing through the streets. Dr. Albright paused in her rounds, watching Drachnid families emerge from their shelters, blinking in the sunlight. They moved cautiously at first, then with growing confidence as they saw humans offering water, medical supplies, and helping hands. "This," Ixalan wrote in his report, "may be the most powerful demonstration of humanity's true nature, not their capacity for war, but their commitment to healing." A fragile peace was beginning to take hold, but tension still simmered beneath the surface. In quiet rooms and open streets, negotiations took place, not just between politicians, but between former enemies learning how to share a world. A week after the surrender, Admiral Fane sat across from 3 Drachnid representatives in what remained of their Grand Council chamber. Sunlight streamed through the cracked dome above, illuminating the dust motes that danced between them. "We propose joint oversight of border systems," Fane said, her voice firm but not unkind. "Your people maintain local governance, with safeguards against future conflicts." In the city's industrial district, Colonel Reyes faced down a group of armed Drachnid loyalists who had seized a power station. Their leader, scales bristling with anger, brandished a ceremonial blade. "You've destroyed everything we built," the loyalist leader hissed. Reyes slowly removed his combat helmet, setting it aside. "We stopped a war that neither side truly wanted. Your people are rebuilding, stronger than before. Join us in that effort." The gesture's significance wasn't lost on the Drachnids. Their warrior culture respected direct confrontation and honest dialogue. After tense moments, the leader lowered his weapon. Across town, Dr. Albright cut a ribbon at the entrance of a gleaming new medical facility. Human and Drachnid medical staff stood together, their differences forgotten in their shared mission to heal. "This hospital," she announced, her voice thick with emotion, "represents everything we fight for. Not destruction, but preservation. Not division, but unity." She turned to a Drachnid nurse beside her. "We renew our oath today to protect all life regardless of origin." In a quiet corner of the government complex, Ixalan shared their findings with Tarek. "The CGA has never seen anything like this," they admitted, gesturing to their data pad. A species capable of such overwhelming force choosing instead to rebuild. Will they understand? Tarek asked. I don't know, Ixalan replied honestly. But what's happening here changes everything we thought we knew about humanity. That afternoon, Admiral Fane stood before the newly constructed hospital. Its clean white walls gleamed in the sunlight, a stark contrast to the battle-scarred buildings around it. The facility bore the same medical insignia as the destroyed hospital cruiser, but now it represented something more, a bridge between former enemies, a promise of a better future. The war was over, but its echoes would shape the galaxy forever. As humanity extended its hand in peace, the galaxy watched, uncertain but intrigued. What they had witnessed was more than war, it was a reckoning, and it had only just begun. The CGA delegation stepped carefully through the rebuilt corridors of Krellin Prime's central complex. Their long robes swept across newly laid floors as Ixalan guided them past work crews of humans and drachnids working side by side. Remarkable, murmured one of the delegates watching Jin Shu direct the installation of advanced power systems. Just weeks ago, this was a battlefield. In the training yards outside, Lieutenant Commander Delgado stood beside a drachnid pilot, pointing at holographic flight paths. The key is anticipating the gravitational shift, she explained. Once you master that, rescue operations in asteroid fields become second nature. The drachnid's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. We never considered using our ships this way before, always for war. Times change, Delgado smiled. And so do we. Across the Capitol Plaza, Dr. Albright and Colonel Reyes stood before the newly completed memorial. Its smooth black surface reflected the morning light, etched with thousands of names, the hospital cruiser's crew and patients. At its base, fresh flowers had been laid by both humans and drachnids. They're learning, Albright said softly, watching a drachnid family explain the memorial's meaning to their young. Really learning. Reyes nodded. Makes you wonder what might have been if we'd just talked first. Admiral Fane's voice crackled across the global communication system. She stood at the highest point of the rebuilt command center, looking out over the sprawling city where construction crews raised new buildings designed by joint human drachnid architects. To all worlds receiving this transmission, she began, her voice clear and strong. We came in vengeance, but we stay in hope. Let this be our promise. Humanity stands ready to protect, to heal, and to guide, today and always. In their private chamber, Ixalan's fingers moved swiftly across their datapad, recording their final observations. Humanity's capacity for both fury and compassion marks a turning point. The galaxy has truly entered the human era. If you enjoyed the story of Jonathan, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.